had a hard time trying to really narrow down this topic, because this is sort of where my heart is with the viewers that show film strips. And of course, Tru Vue falls into that category. And those of you who know me know that I am a really avid Tru Vue collector and trying to be historian. And so to keep this into 20 minutes, I wanted to talk about the other viewers, but I am going to break into some Tru Vue history and just give a little tease about an upcoming historical essay that I have. So I'm going to try to really breeze through some of the slides. So there'll be time for questions afterward. So really my talk is about, we had originally with stereoscopes, we had these single view cards, and later with ViewMaster, we ended up with reels, and then we also had multi-view cards, and we have these single view slides. I'm kind of talking about the period sort of transitioning in between those. So I know cards, those initial cards were produced along with film strips, but there was this period, and actually the one book, the Stereoscopes book by Paul Wing, he actually stops his book there and says that there's a whole period that you could just devote another book to, another volume, just to the film strip viewers. But he thought just for the scope of his book that he would pause there. So that's sort of where I'm picking up. And I'm just going to jump right in because I want to spend a little bit more time on the Tru Vue history. So this is, and forgive me if I butcher any of the terminology here, but this was one of the earliest film strip viewers, the Homéos out of France. And this was around the 1910s, maybe right around 1914, and it was an accessory to the Homéos stereo camera, which is said to be the world's first 35mm stereo camera, created by the French industrialist Richard, who helped really to spread stereo photography to the masses with the Veriscope line. And this one is made of wood, and I have two types in my collection. So this is one of my favorite ones. It has the film holder on the side, and the handle that you see at the bottom is actually used to advance the film. And there is a version without. So in my next slides, you'll see me sort of comparing the two of them together. But I am going to go through it pretty quickly. So the other, and these are both in my collection, I actually just got the one without the handle and without the film holders on the side. I actually just got that one earlier this week. And in time to compare the two for you. So you have a different way of, I'm sorry. I don't normally do this, but I am going to, okay, sorry. Stop to let people in. All right. So there you can see some differences in how you adjust the lenses and how you advance the film. And so on the one without the handle at the bottom, the film is advanced with what I thought was actually, so you'll see the top lifted up there. I thought you actually turned that, but you push it in and it grabs hold of the sprockets with the little tooth that you can see there, and you advance the film that way. Moving into the 1920s, we have the Hollywood Filmoscope. And I'm sorry, I didn't put the company here, but it's made of metal, as you can see. And it was, I was looking up who actually had the patent on this. And I'll get into that in a moment, but here is a little bit of the design. The really cool thing is it folds completely flat. And so there was an application in 1928. The patent for this was filed by someone named Andre, I want to say Barlater. And the company that was supposed to produce this was a company out of Laguna Beach called Craftsman Studios. And there was an article in the paper in 1929 that said that it signed this contract to produce 200,000 of these filmoscopes, and that it would have the phrase on it, made in Laguna Beach, California. So I don't know what happened between that and when it actually came out, because it says Hollywood on it, and all of the film related to this is Hollywood related. And so the film, I actually have 2 in my collection. There are 15 altogether. They're all Hollywood related. Anything related to filmoscope that you find is collectible. I was going to pause and actually tell you what's collectible out of these different, everything related to this. I only know two other people with one. I know Eric has one. And the other person that I'm not sure if he's on the call, but I know someone else with one. And I have 2. And they rarely come up. So if you do see one, grab it. The price varies. Sometimes people don't know what they have. The film, however, I only know one other person with film, and he's the one who sold me these 2. And he has, I don't know, maybe another 8 or 9 of them. So really, really hard to find. One of my favorites is this. It's called the Magic Theater. Colleen Moore Magic Theater. It's from the 1930s. And it's made of cardboard, and it was specifically made to advertise the Colleen Moore Dollhouse. So Colleen Moore was a famous silent movie star with a passion for building dollhouses. And in the late 20s, she spent like today's equivalent of $7 million to build this elaborate dollhouse that's still on display today in Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry. And to find one of these completely intact like this was just like, for me, a collector's gold mine. So if you ever see one of these, pick it up. It is collectible. I think the people that sell them, I don't know, it's like something paper, $15. To me, it's just priceless. A couple of more views of it. And this is some of the paperwork that came with it, with a description of the different pictures that are on the film. So the film that I have, I only have one, and I have 2 versions. And there's one that has Colleen's photo on it, and the other one doesn't. I think there may have been either advertised, I'm not sure if they actually ever made additional films for it. I know they advertised that there would be additional films, but I don't know. So if anyone else knows, that would be great to find out. However, one of the really cool things that I found was what I feel is a prototype of it. So this is actually made of wood, and it has the same, well, they're similar. I have pictures comparing them, but the illustrations are slightly different, but it's papered onto this wood. And I don't know if this was something that was for sale. I've never seen another one. If anyone has any information on that, that would be great to know. But for now, I'm believing that it was some type of prototype. Moving forward to 1930s, and we'll talk a little bit about DeVry later. So we're still in the US, and DeVry was created by Herman DeVry of the movie projection company DeVry Corp. And DeVry, it is the same company. So eventually QRS, DeVry, went bankrupt. DeVry did turn into DeVry Technical Institute, into the same school, if you are familiar in the United States with DeVry, which it's changed its name a few times, but this is the same DeVry. And so they created this viewer and they competed with Trueview. So I'll talk a little bit about Trueview, but they were also selling films at the 1933 Century of Progress World's Fair. Now, it was said that they also were going to produce advertising films and that they never did. But I actually do have one, and I found someone else that has one as well. And the films were produced by, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with Jam Handy. He was an Olympic swimmer who went on to produce tons of training films for auto companies and military. Here's the box. And the paperwork that went with it. So here's where they talked about how you could use this. You could use this to talk to customers. So in terms of film, I do have in my collection 2 of the same film. So the part 1 of the 1933 Century of Progress World's Fair, but I also do have the advertising film, and it was for Goodyear. And I have a few pictures from that film. Okay, so moving on. So novel view, so same time frame. So we're in the 1930s, and this is the same time frame as Trueview, which we're coming up to. So far we've looked at, in terms of the size and shape of these viewers. We saw DeVry's. Here's Novel Views. Novel View had 2. And so Novel View was produced by a novel art company out of New York. And as I mentioned, there are 2 versions. So this version would advance the film by sliding that piece in and out. They had this other version, sort of the Art Deco version, that had the advance knob. And that is box. And in terms of film, I have 101 in my collection, and there are 65, I have 65 unique titles. There are more. And I do have, the one that's shown here there is an advertising one. I believe they made a couple, but the one that I have is Jack Armstrong, Jungle Adventure. So that was done for a radio promotion, and at the time it was called a movie scope. Really hard to find this complete set intact with the film not ripped and the viewer is not rusty and the promotional box still looking good. But you can find them. I feel like they show up maybe once a year. Okay, moving on to Trueview. And I didn't put that Trueview is out of Chicago, 1930s. So I want to talk a little bit about the history here. So you'll see highlighted over there, Illinois. And I want to back up and start with the company that Trueview came from, which is a company called Rock Island Bridge and Iron Works. And that's always been a little bit of a mystery to people. Why did a bridge and iron works company start producing this viewer? So it actually started, the company started way back in 1912. And there was a man named Mark Canary. He resigned as the business manager for Des Moines Bridge and Iron Company and decided that Rock Island, which was right by the Mississippi River, would be the perfect spot for starting up another bridge company. So him and 2 other men got licenses to incorporate Rock Island Bridge and Iron Works with about $30,000 capital. And that business would end up lasting another 58 years. It ended in 1970, but it would end up with this dramatic spinoff in a completely unexpected direction that this is why, to me, I'm so fascinated with it, that it really influenced a generation of 3D. And believe it or not, none of that is mentioned on Rock Island's website when you go into their history. So Rock Island is right there on the border of Iowa and Illinois. And if I zoom in a little bit more to Rock Island, and I'll tell you why I'm talking about Rock Island so much in a little bit. But from Wikipedia, basically Rock Island had a rich history of bridge building. And they had the first railroad bridge across the Mississippi, which is now gone, but it was an unusual 2-track railroad bridge. And it was the largest roller dam in the world. And so one of Trueview's first films is actually on locks and dams. And it's one of the really, really early films that they have. So if you ever find that one, that's a really collectible one. So there is this island that you see there, Rock Island Arsenal. And that's where the town got its name. I think it's actually called Arsenal Island now. So the thing about Rock Island is it wasn't a little sleepy town by the river. It was dubbed at the time the Citadel of Sin. It's not that far from Chicago, where there's just a lot of crime happening. In the Second World War is going to play a big role in Trueview's operations, as it will in almost every business that's running at that time. But the First World War and the Prohibition and the Great Depression play a role in Trueview by actually shaping the man that ends up leading it. So, as I was saying, it was called the Citadel of Sin. It had its own mob-style underworld, complete with its own version of Al Capone. And if you're familiar with the movie Road to Perdition, you may remember Paul Newman's character, the ruthless John Rooney. So in real life, his name was John Looney. And during the years that Rock Island Bridge and Ironworks was taking off, he was terrorizing Rock Island. And the organized crime was so rampant with prostitution, blackmail, gunfights, bombing. That's how it actually got its name as the Citadel of Sin. And in fact, Looney actually got beat up by the mayor of Rock Island. And the National Guard came out and stayed in Rock Island for like a month. Why is all of this important? Because the person who was actually elected mayor to clean that up would end up being the person who was president of Trueview. So just to show you a little ad from 1930 paper about Rock Island Bridge and Ironworks. So this guy here, this is Rosenfeld. And he was a National Guardsman. He and his brother organized the Rosenfeld Hop and Company, erected the Fort Theater building, played a prominent role as a member of the Citizens Committee to sort of combat in 1922 all of this lawlessness that I was talking about. He served as mayor of Rock Island for 2 terms, and he was elected because he was the one that cleaned that up. And he served in the 1st Illinois Cavalry in the 1916 Mexican War. He was a major in the World War I, and he served in the Illinois National Guard. And he was quoted as saying, "I am ready now for any old game that concerns Rock Island, from peanuts and baseball to business and politics." He was a really, really dynamic person. And it was under his leadership that I believe Trueview became as popular as it did. He didn't invent Trueview. So Trueview was created by Joshua Bennett. And he's the one that owned the original patent. And he had experimented with this concept for years before arriving at Rock Island Bridge and Ironworks. And as we saw already, other companies had been toying with these ideas of these small handheld stereoscopes that use 35 millimeters film strips instead of like the cards. So we had, over in France in the 1910s, and then even around the same time as this was being patented, in fact, a month after this patent, that's when de Vries patented his. And then they both ended up being at the World's Fair. So you had all of these other ones that were, competing. Why did Trueview go on to last so long? So I believe they had one of the greatest marketing campaigns out there. So de Vries created some films, like I said, but Trueview went all out in their advertising. They showed up at the Century of Progress World's Fair with themed viewers. They had themed mailer boxes. You could get them with Chicagoland on it, Century of Progress on it. Their photographers would go on to shoot many, many photos covering the fair. They started out with 4 films and went on to have 8 Century of Progress fairs. They had the Sally Rand film. And that same year, that's when they were ready to go on the record and say that they had this new product called Trueview. And they were being made at the Rock Island Bridge and Ironworks plant. Orders started coming in from all over the US. They had jobbers, salesmen, marketing, selling these. They had to increase employment at the plant. And they were already looking beyond just the World's Fair and travel to having industrial contracts and specialty films like the Locks and Dam that covered the roller gate dam at Rock Island. By November of that same year, so this is just the first year that they came out. We're still in 1933. They'd gone from producing 300 Trueview devices a month to 50,000 per month. And that required hiring more people, 50 salespeople nationwide selling, and new digs in New York. They had offices in Los Angeles, London, orders coming from outside the US. And the Christmas season was a spectacular success. So that's actually a salesman's briefcase that I have in my collection. So I'm gonna have to speed up a little bit here. So their success continued into 1934. Trueview's inventor became, Bennett, he became the general sales manager, and he went into he worked out of the leased space they had in Rockefeller Center, and they also have films on Rockefeller Center. And then in 34, the World's Fair opened for a second run, and Trueview did another design, a faceplate on their viewer for the 34 World's Fair. It's the only one I don't have. It is really hard to find. So I have several of the 1933 ones. I don't have 1934. But they went on to do these custom plates. Like the third one down says made for Fred Harvey. So that was a restaurant chain at the time. They had these, as you can see, the Bobby Jones golf series. So they were doing all kinds of things. And into 1935, their success continued. And they ended up, there were some new bankruptcy laws around then. And so it prompted Rosenfield to spin off the Trueview department from Rock Island Bridge and Ironworks into its own corporation. The only obstacle was that guy Bennett. So when he came to the company, he came with that patent for Trueview. And so Rock Island Bridge and Ironworks ran with it. I mean, and it was considered, he was an employee of theirs, but when they wanted to spin it off, he was like, that's my patent. So that actually held things up. He was claiming royalties were lost, and it took a couple of years, but they finally did settle. And I think it was at the time, $3,000 settlement with Bennett, and Trueview was incorporated in 1937 with Rosenfeld as the president. So I'm almost to the end of Trueview. So in case you're like sick of all this Trueview. So in 1940, they announced their new design. So they went from that old kind of metal and plastic version that they had before to this new streamlined design. But what else was happening around that time? Well, 1939, we know, was the World's Fair in New York, and who was there? Viewmaster. They showed up with their new viewer by Gruber, and competing with Trueview. So, and theirs was completely different. It wasn't the film, obviously, you all know that. It was the reels, and what else? It was color. And you know, Trueview had thought about doing color, and they just didn't do it. But they redesigned their viewer, and also the war started. So World War II started in 39 with US joining in 1941. Something else happened at that time. Rosenfeld, so, you know, that guy was just like I said, he was dynamic, he was a business owner, he was a politician, he was a mayor. Well, he got appointed by the governor of Illinois to be to head up the Public Works Department. So he had to leave Rock Island Bridge and Iron Works because it was too similar to contracts that he might handle with Public Works. However, they found that Trueview did not fall into that category, so he did not have to leave Trueview. So he continued on. And the competition from Viewmaster was really stiff. And we all know how that eventually ended. But it didn't end right away. They actually coexisted for a little while. Trueview eventually came out with color, not the greatest color at the time. They tried to do some other things to compete. Now, it's been said that they started calling theirs reels as well, but there's actually evidence when Trueview first started, they used to call their film strips reels. So I don't think that was done just to compete with Viewmaster. Okay, so forging on, we get into 1943. So what you see is, so Viewmaster had these contracts with the war. So like I said, the war affected companies' ability to produce things. Viewmaster ended up getting some contracts for training films. That's how they were allowed to continue on. Well, so did Trueview. They got contracts. The American Red Cross ordered like 10,000 viewers and sets to be used at different hospitals and on ships. The USO put Trueview in about 500 of their different camps. In 1946, actually, Trueview got sued by a veteran because he thought he'd be able to return to his job. That's a whole other story. And then, you know, they eventually succumbed to the competition. Sawyer's did eventually buy Trueview, and you know, I didn't mention Disney, but Trueview had the Disney contracts, and they hadn't done much with them. And Sawyer saw the advantage of that and purchased them. And so Rosenfeld died in 1959 at the age of 82. In 58, Rock Island Bridge and Iron Works was sold to Macomber, a steel company, and it was then changed to Rock Island Steel Company, and that eventually closed in 1970. I won't go into what Sawyer's did with Trueview. Eventually, it just became their toy division. They saw Viewmaster as being more of the family product, and they thought, well, what do we do with Trueview? It has a name already. You know, people know it really well. So they went away from the film strips. They decided to do cards. They didn't want to do reels because they didn't want to compete. So David Starkman sent me this great article of how the whole transition, and they tried to come up with a new viewer and what's it going to be like and how are we going to do this. So yeah, they eventually landed on cards. And as you can see, they just had a ton of promotional stuff just for kids, all marketed as like a toy. So that's eventually when you see Trueview become the sort of plastic thing. Okay, enough history. There's way more to Trueview's history that I won't get into. I'm just going to move on to what is collectible. Here are Trueview boxes. So those first two that you see are the earliest boxes. Last time I spoke to you guys, I think, or a couple of meetings back, I only had one. I actually came across another one since then. And then those blue ones are ones that were around the time of the World's Fair. They say different things on them. Those are always good to get. That's third column, just regular Trueview boxes. Then you start to see some of the color sets and the Disney sets that they came out with. That one at the very bottom, red, looks like a little bird on it. That is one of the Fred Harvey sets. And then there are others for like the Grand Canyon and yeah, but those first few in the first two columns are pretty collectible if you can find them in good condition. Those first two, any condition if you find them. Also, there were boxes that were specifically made for advertising. So you can see La Caverna Hotel. It's hard to read on that first one, but it's actually, Ian and I discovered those together. It's like an agricultural firm with a couple of really interesting films, and then Chicago Technical College. The cases. So I'm sure you've seen the wooden cases. If you look at the smallest picture there are different designs. And so a couple of them you don't see very often. There are the leather cases. The big picture, there are actually cases that open horizontally. So those are always cool to have in your collection instead of the ones where the hinges are in the back vertically. Film, I have over 2,000 Trueview films in my collection. There are not 2,000 titles, so I obviously have a lot of duplicates. Those silver ones, I almost never buy anything in a silver box. So I have over 900 that are in the silver box, and yet only about 100 that are in those blue boxes. So those ones that you see in that case that are blue box or even have the red on the end, always get it. Always get it. If it's in good condition, it's so collectible. The most common, Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, you'll see them sit on eBay for like eons. They're just so many of them. Trueview was huge, and there's a ton of them. Least common, though, are some of the Marvel cartoons. Obviously, the advertising, because they didn't make very many. And then some of the really early ones where they experimented with things and never repeated those films. Color-wise, they didn't do great with color. So at the top is one of their color power models film strips. And as you can see, it's faded. At the bottom, however, there are a very small few that were done differently. And the color is still really, really amazing on them. So that bottom one is actually it's a depth photography. They have tons of depth photography, very few that you'll find that are in color. And this one, the color is really good. And also some of the Disney series ones are done, and the color is just still really good on them. A really fun one to find for your collection is this blue base film. So I've got a couple like that, and this is Sally Rand. I believe it is her, maybe the Bubble Dance. Okay, I'm almost done, promise. Trueview, though, you'll know there was an England version of Trueview, spelled differently, same viewer and same box and film, everything is like the same. There's a lot of speculation as to why that happened. One thing that I did find is that in 1949, one of the chief advertising people said that England is out at the moment because of the pound devaluation. So they had a big presence over there. And then if you look up pound devaluation, there was like a big thing that happened in 1949, and England was out for them. And it was one of their biggest foreign markets. So I think that's when something kind of happened, and they're like, okay, let's just keep this thing going. We can't, be the US Trueview, but we're going to keep it going. So through Trueview, just have a few more. Veriscope F40. This is transposing, so it has a reversing prism inside. You can view image pairs directly from the camera. The mahogany and chrome version came first, and then there was a black backlight later, and the stand is really hard to find. So the difference in design is that the black one actually has holders for the film roll on the side. So you can see where it's on the mahogany one, it would actually hang on the outside, and the black one is different there. And there's the stand. Sightseer, England, 1950s. There are 204 titles, mostly Oxford, London, Canterbury, think places like scenic things, but they also have locomotives, dog show, Madame Tussaud, and I have the Madame Tussaud, and I've got I think a railways one. So I have 13 of the Sightseer films in my collection. Okay, fast forward, 1970s. We're still making film strip viewers. So over in Japan, Pan Pet. And it had this little cord handle. The first one I found, I thought somebody put that on. They actually come out of the box like that. It is Panorama. There's a couple of the boxes. They did a huge promotion with the 1970 Expo. And then there's also a see-through box. I'm gonna have to speed through this. Film, I have 8 of them. They actually did an erotica, a couple of those. I've got 2 of those. Golf, trains I have, and then I have all 5 of the exposition films. That's just what their film strips look like. Lastly, this is the last one, 3Discover from Canada, the 1990s. It is battery operated, panoramic, cartridge based. The color and the quality is amazing. So I have the New York, Great America, Washington, and the Southwest, and Yosemite in my collection. The only 2 that I do not have, Microkino and Superview. So those are 2 more film strip viewers I don't have in my collection yet. What about roll film? I don't count those, but I'll show these to you anyway. So there's the Celd and the Stereo Elaine. I have both of those in my collection, and they use the same film. This also is like roll film, but these are parallel images, side-by-side images that are, it's a different format, but I thought I would mention them anyway. Someone did ask about them. So in closing, here they all are again, and thank you.
So Keita, would you mind talking a minute about the American Red Cross set and what films were included with that? Were they learning first aid, or?
No, they're not special. They're not special to the American Red Cross. They are just a selection of their standard films. Any other questions?
So Trueview must be your favorite one to collect, is it?
It is.
I remember when I was a child, I had one that had the cardboard views, some comics, long gone, but.
Yeah, those are, yeah, I could do an hour just on the card ones too. So I do believe I went over my 20 minutes, but I hope I only used my 10 minutes of Q&A. So I actually had 30 minutes. So hopefully forgive me. If there aren't many questions, then we're probably good on time.